women, we have spent decades fighting for our right to vote. So when you go to those booths and cast your ballot, remember, Warren G. Harding is way the cutest.
If your friends are nerdy and you are nerdy too, I want to talk to you. Friends talking nerdy.
Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Friends Talking Nerdy. I'm Shelby Navoni.
Hey guys, I'm Asia Beecroft. Meredith Firetag.
And today we're going to be talking about women in sci-fi and fantasy and nerd culture.
Love it. So I kind of want to start off and ask, what does define for you when you talk about sci-fi? What does that mean to you, and how would you separate it from fantasy?
So science fiction, I think, for me, definitely has more of something where maybe we're dealing with something in an imagined future world.
Okay.
Things that involve technology, high amounts of technology, space, these sort of like fantastical elements, but something that is definitely like set in the future with technology. That's kind of what comes to mind for me.
Yeah, I think sci-fi for me, it doesn't even necessarily have to be far in the future or even necessarily in the future, but it is a twist on reality that does have a science-based inspiration, and so even if it's something that's sort of contemporary, but what if we had this sort of technology, then that even for me would kind of qualify as sci-fi, something like Black Mirror sort of. But definitely, I mean, the future stuff is always the kind of most exciting.
I think that's where people's minds, automatically you think sci-fi and you think of like Star Trek.
Yeah.
You know, but that's a good point is that, that we can have sci-fi and have it take place in our modern world. Yeah. But like it'd be like a different situation of what's kind of going on, like you're talking about.
I like that you said Black Mirror too, because it kind of reminds me, it's like those alternate histories. So it could still be the year 2018, but it's driven by science and technology. Mm-hmm. So like for me, if it was like fantasy, it would be something like really fantastical. Mm-hmm. And like there's fun things where it's like, oh, the evolution and you've developed these special abilities, and I'm like, that's more fantasy. But when it's something that's like outside of yourself that we created, then I'm like, okay, I kind of feel this is sci-fi.
Yeah.
It's generally like my division of the two.
I think that's a good distinction between the two. Yeah.
Agreed. And what was your guys' first introduction to any of those genres? Any pop culture, science fiction, fantasy?
I think my parents were both two really big nerds, and so we had a lot of like Star Wars and Star Trek in the house. And they were also in the military, so they loved Stargate. Yeah. And so that was like the combination of the sci-fi and then their military background and all of that like together in one show. Yeah. So it was like a family affair to sit around and watch Stargate together, and then also the Star Trek was just always something that I feel like was like always on in the background. Yeah. Like whatever Star Trek was on, you know, we were watching a lot of Next Gen, and then lots of Voyager and lots of Enterprise, just like constantly all the time. Yeah. And so those sort of things, it was just that I feel like that was what we kind of did together, was we watched a lot of TV, and it was always typically like science fiction stuff. And then once that sort of grew, you know, it evolved into adding in more of this nerdy stuff. Yeah. So like Xena, Warrior Princess, Hercules, all of those, like, but that's getting into the sort of fantasy realm, but they definitely felt like they kind of went hand in hand with the sort of content that, it's like two different worlds, but you just sort of naturally gravitated towards something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
And once you get into one, you kind of just expand.
Yeah. And then you're like, what else is it? Yeah. How about you?
For me, I think similar. Star Trek was like I don't remember a time when I didn't watch Star Trek, and so that kind of was my foundation. But both my parents also total nerds. My dad teaches Latin, and my mom was an English major in Renaissance and medieval literature, and so just total like embrace of anything sort of geeky. And so a lot of fantasy in terms of books growing up. And then sci-fi, Star Trek. Star Wars, but a little bit less emphasis on that. And then X-Files and
that show, I remember listening to my parents, like they would watch it before I went to bed at night, or it'd be like right when I went to bed, and I would hear the theme of X-Files, and it would scare the shit out of me. I would hear, and then they'd have like the lights down, and I'd come out into the bathroom, and then I would just like hear that sound, and everything would be dark and scary, and terrible.
I hear another sound, and it's our alarm saying that we actually passed the Bechdel Wallace test, which means we have gone 5 minutes as 3 women on camera and radio that have not talked about him yet. I'm really excited for it, so that also means that I definitely want to bring on your usual host. So come on in.
Hey everybody, how you doing? Again, I'm going to primarily leave this show to 3 ladies that I respect here, but since we have Shelby and Asia that are new to the show, what we usually ask new people, what is your nerd origin story?
Nerd origin story. I think I talked about it a little bit. With that.
I don't know. I think that kind of counts. I kind of feel I had a similar childhood. I was raised by a single mom with my grandparents, and all of them total nerds. So Star Trek, Star Wars, yes, always, that's a given. Xena was a big one, a given. But the other thing was it was also books for my family. So like TV was always on in the background, and my grandma loved watching it, and it was always like the Sci-Fi Channel my whole life, and that's great. But a big thing was also books for me, and so I think like one of my first introductions to sci-fi was actually Journey to the Center of the Earth, and my mom read that to me when I was like maybe 4 years old. And I don't think I've ever gone back. Like whenever I pick a book to read, it's something close to that. And then of course Harry Potter at around 4th grade, and then I was like, no, that's it, it's solidified. And then this obsession, this fantasy sci-fi obsession was going nowhere. And then X-Files, of course, for like the horror aspect of it all, because that scared the crap out of me when I was younger, and I would watch it with my sister in the dark, and then and then she'd like pull, so I'm gonna like leave you, and like good luck sleeping. And that was a big one for me.
So you liked to be scared by your
So my sister would scare me with X-Files, and it was like a really fun kind of torture. And then I don't know if you guys remember Tales from the Crypt.
I did watch that.
My mom would do that to me. So like what my sister would do, my mom would like put that on right as I'm going to sleep in the living room, and my room is right next to it. So you just hear it, and I would like walk out and see the skeleton just like introducing these horrifying stories, and I think it kind of turned me into like kind of an adrenaline junkie, but on a fear. You know, it's not the adrenaline high, it's the fear of like, oh my gosh, like, so can I actually control myself and not be scared shitless? And sometimes yes, sometimes no. Most of the time yes. I'm not gonna lie, Sinister scared the crap out of me. I couldn't walk home at night for like a week. So thanks. But
I can't do the scary stuff now. All of that stuff, it freaked me out too much, and then I was so impressionable that I would be having nightmares. And so I would have, like, I did watch Tales of the Crypt, but I still remember these images in my head because I dreamed about them and had nightmares about them. And so they're still there because I'm thinking, okay, this like really scared the shit out of me. But so the Star Trek and the Xena, I think, is what really made it kind of skyrocket for me, because I really loved her, and I loved like everything about her, and I'm sure we'll get into that more, but like I always had a kind of like I wanted to be her, and so then that extended into I want to dress up like Xena, and so for Halloween that was like back when they actually did sell the costume in the store, and so I remember getting that costume when I was about 8 years old and having that and just feeling so cool and like running around in this costume, and then that kind of sparked this other interest that I got into was like cosplay, but it really just stemmed from me just wanting to be Xena. And so once I had that costume from the store, as I grew out of it, I would tear it apart and like take the elements and put it onto some black vinyl or something to like make a new Xena costume. And then I just kept doing that. And then my dad was really into Lord of the Rings, which I didn't know until we were out watching a movie, and there was this preview. It was like the teaser trailer for Fellowship before it even came out.
Yeah.
And he was sitting there going, "Oh my God, no, they're not." And I'm like, "What? What's happening?" He's like, "They're not doing this." I'm like, "What is going on?" I've never seen my dad so excited about something. And then he's like, "Oh man, And then afterwards, I don't even remember what movie I was seeing, but I was just so impacted by his reaction to seeing the trailer for that.
Yeah.
And so he's like, "It's The Lord of the Rings. It's the best thing ever. You got to read these books." And so I read all these books and like was totally prepared for when they came out.
Yeah.
And then I fell in love with characters in that and thought, I want to dress like them too. So it's just making all these costumes of all these characters as I was a kid, and then finally learned about cosplay, like not until like 2011, until I was like in my early 20s.
Yeah.
And then learned, this is a thing people do, and they like get together and do this.
It's not just me.
It's not just me. I'm sitting here making costumes for myself just to wear, like, or go to, I could go to a Renaissance fair or something, but I literally just wanted to have those things. And so mine definitely turned into this relationship of like being really in love with like sort of like the aesthetic and like what these women were wearing that I could wear, and so I could feel closer to what I admired about them. So that's kind of the story, and then kind of where I am with it now. I still do cosplay and still like love all of those things.
So you definitely saw yourself in women in sci-fi.
Oh yeah,
and you got to dress like that.
Yes.
Love Halloween, and definitely wore my Halloween costumes not on Halloween. But generally it was like a mouse. I always like dressing up as a gray mouse. Don't ask me why. I don't have an answer.
You had a lot of red wall as a child.
I don't. But I think the Secret of Nim is really what it was, and that was just something so fun. And then like Watership Down as well. So it was just like this rabbit mouse my entire life, and I thought I was super adorable with like ears and a nose on, like going to bed, and not even at like a very like cute like, I was 5. No, it was probably like 8. Yeah, still at 8. I was like, I want my little mouse nose. I don't know. My mom has pictures. I really hope she burns them. What about you? What was your like first time that you really thought you saw yourself in a female character in sci-fi?
Sci-fi specifically, so one of the things that growing up with Star Trek, like literally raised on Star Trek, I saw myself in each of the characters in so many different ways, and so I identify myself as a third Betazoid, a third Vulcan, and a third Klingon. Like that's, if you know what that means, that's my personality right there in a nutshell. So I saw myself kind of, I guess, in these sort of archetypes in characters, whether male or female. But I don't know that there was like a particular one where I was like, yes, that's me. I think the first character that I was like, yes, I see me, and also that's like the aspects of me that I want to amplify was what was it called? Did you ever read I think it was the Lioness trilogy, either of you?
No.
Alana by Tamora Pierce.
It sounds so familiar, but I never read it.
Okay, so it's this girl who, she has a twin brother. They're twins, they're gingers. She's supposed to go off to a nunnery to learn to be a wife, and he's supposed to go off and learn to be a knight in the king's court, and both of them are like, fuck that noise. And so he ends up, they switch places and falsify paperwork, and she goes and pretends to be a boy for, I don't know, 6 years or so, and learns to be a knight, and like she's this itty bitty fiery redheaded chick who just like
sounds familiar.
Has to like uphill so many battles, and is all passion and is smart, but like all passion, like, has to learn how to rein that in, and like, finally is like, okay, I'm your equal and I'm respected for who I am, and I'm coming out as who I am, and because of who I am, you respect me even though I'm a woman instead of a man. And that was the first time where I was like, that's how I want to be. So that ferocity, I think I admired ferocity and dedication. Because it's you'll have that to survive a little bit.
I feel that too, like, inspired by or like, I want to emulate this. I saw that a lot too growing up. Like, maybe not necessarily like I saw me, and sometimes I'm like, that's kind of okay, because I saw kind of more who I want to be.
I think that's why I connected with Xena too, was like, I think I felt this kind of like energy in myself, and then would see her kind of like exercise her agency and be this like big, strong, powerful figure in a man's world. You know, and so that was something, like, they would bring it up in the show sometimes, and they'd be like, oh, you're just a little girl, and she'd just take out 20 or 30 men, you know, like, all together, and you're like, you know. But I remember there was like a pretty pivotal moment where like, I was watching the show, and I think Xena and her sidekick Gabrielle walked into a bar, and there were these drunk men everywhere, and this one drunk man comes and sidles up next to Xena. He's just like, hey, pretty lady. And that's something that all of us can relate to. And even though I was like 12 or 13, I think, when I saw this moment happen, I knew that was like a real thing. And I experienced being in a moment maybe like that, where like, you were being put on by a man or something. And her reaction was to just backhand punch this guy. And then Gabrielle, her sidekick, just didn't even flinch. No one flinched. This guy just like went down. Just went down, and then she was like annoyed. And then she just like keeps walking on to the next thing. And all these men are just trying to fuck with her, and she's just like, you know, flinging them aside like they're nothing. And that, to me, I was like, oh man, she is so strong, and she just kind of does those things that, like, oh, you wish you could do in your own life. You know, and so I always say, like, my role model as a child was 100% her. I don't think I had any like real life people in my life that I like looked up to and wanted to be like. It was totally Xena. Like, I don't know who I would be if that show didn't exist. Because it was such a thing that I looked at and tried to model myself after. And then the show had such a wonderful character arc for her too, where, you know, she first started out in this very like punching heads and that's really all she knows how to do kind of thing, to this relationship she develops with that that sidekick, to learn how to like relax and rely on others and like love and have friendship and be vulnerable. And so her arc and the other character's arc, which was this also another wonderful woman story, where she started out as this meek little like farmer girl and then wanted to be Xena, just kind of like how I wanted to be Xena, but then realized as she's going on this journey that it is, you know, she's her own person and she has her own wonderful qualities of being, you know, a bard or an artist or whatever. And that, you know, there was one quote that was like, Xena, you know, and like I realized that it was warmer in the sun than instead of being in Xena's shadow. I was like, oh, so I could like connect with both of these characters in some way or another, and they both like taught you such great things about like kind of, you know, like being strong, but also still embracing your, you know, feminine side or your other side or whatever, you know, that we call it feminine, but just a side that is as affectionate and vulnerable and loving and caring and all these kind of things, but that is also strong at the same time.
I definitely had like that kind of like badass role model that was Xena, but in my mom, and I was like that too. I was like really feisty when I was younger, and I seem like really calm and laid back now, and it's having to like learn to like, okay, great, I can't just go like punch people in the face because you said something super rude. No, you know, like I have to like try to stay poised and so on. And so it's like really interesting to see like like what it sounds like you grew up with, kind of like battling inside, where you're like, ooh, girl, just like and like that feeling inside where you're like, man, I feel like I'm just like strong, kick-ass, badass woman, but I'm also like, okay, hold on, I can stay poised and like still articulate this, and and like survival has kind of changed in respect to like how I respond. as well, which has been really interesting in myself, that I'm coming up against that a lot recently.
Yeah.
Seeing that too. So,
and I think that's why it's like super important that these characters do exist, because they're multifaceted.
Yes.
That they have arcs, and they have all of this stuff that goes on with them. That's not just, I'm just here to kick ass and hate men. It's, I'm here to kick ass, do this, and all these sort of things that, it's not just like a one-sided character.
Agreed.
Because
like duality.
Duality.
Beyond. Yeah.
You're modeling like if a child is modeling themselves after this, it should be more than just like only one thing.
Agreed.
Because that's how people are.
Yeah. And that's like the great thing about the genre is there's a lot to pick from in terms of like, okay, so for me, this is weird because I was trying to think of it when I was like, I want to ask this question. I'm really very curious. I really struggled to find the answer, and I thought that was odd. So I was like, there should be a lot to pick from. And I think Dana Scully, obviously.
Yes.
Because even though I was frightened, she pretty much never was. And I love gaining like that kind of just like logical calmness. There's always some sort of answer, like you don't have to be frightened all the time or worked up. Like you can get through it, and despite everything that character went through, she's still like that even in I'm not going to say the episodes that have come out now. I'm going to admit I'm a little bitter about those. I feel like her character digressed a bit. So let's say 90s Dana Scully definitely inspired me. And then of course like the Harry Potter nerd culture is very strong with me, and so Hermione Granger. And the older I get, the more like her I feel like become, especially being in school. So she was very unapologetic and intelligent and like combative she had to be, and witty if she needed to be, and standoffish, and I liked that. Even though going back and rereading the books, that wasn't always the case very early on, and so I think that's why I didn't make that connection until later, because in the beginning she's very subdued. She like the words that I used to describe her, like, oh, she shrieked, and it's almost like you're kind of putting her down a little bit. But then seeing getting on later, seeing it later, growing into those things, I definitely appreciated.
Well, Hermione is kind of interesting because, she, I feel like it's the way that J.K. Rowling described her and the way that she responded when people mocked her. Like, she had a breaking point, and I think that that's not... I think it's kind of representative of a lot of smart girls, like even smart boys too. Like, you're the one who speaks up in class. You know things. You like want to show people that you know things and teach them, and you are dismissed and derided for those inclinations.
Yep.
And so I think it kind of what painted a true picture, whether we like that's the picture or not, of that kind of experience. But it was nice to see kind of her, like, I guess the other people around her's redemption of appreciating those aspects of her, because it's like, oh my god, this is an amazing resource. Like, how many times would Harry and Ron have died if Hermione hadn't known the answer? How many times? Every time. Like, book every time they would be dead. Like,
I mean, that would have been a great, like, one and done for Voldemort, but, like, let's be real, Hermione just, like, carried their asses for 7 books, and to make sure...
The other two got on by luck. Like, that was it.
Yeah. Right? Wrong place, wrong time, but kind of made it through, and a lot of that luck, if you ask me, was her intelligence. They really lucked out that she was willing to put up with their shit together. In my opinion, at least. Definitely. And it's kind of interesting too, because it's perception, like who's telling the story, who's describing Hermione, and the words that they use to describe her to kind of build that. And she remained unchanged. So she didn't like change because they used these words or they talked to her a certain way. It wasn't like Hermione shrieked and then she cried, and these like really kind of like degrading stereotypical ways of like describing young girls. She kind of kept with it. And the thing that really got me is years back, someone was like rereading the books and like, oh man, I'm so over this spew thing with like her activism, and I was like, oh yeah, like how dare her want like equality? Are you kidding me? And kind of like disliking that she had a cause that she was really adamant about, and like trying to like educate Harry and Ron around and kind of get them to like break from their perceptions. And I definitely see that in myself because I'm a little unrelenting. But I love that she was unrelenting. And even if you found that annoying, well, a good thing she didn't change just because you didn't like it. Like, she was happy to just continue on. If she wanted to teach you, and if you wanted to learn, you got it. And if you didn't, well, she was going to do her thing. And I see myself in that a lot.
I like it.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. What else we got for questions?
Let me look at my phone because I don't have great memory.
That's what phones are for, right?
Yeah. Oh, I actually had something that I thought was really interesting that I kind of wanted to say, but then also gain some insight from you guys or commentary if you have it. Because we are talking about women in the genre, in sci-fi and fantasy and so on, and as only three women on camera doing so, I wanted to share, did you guys know who actually invented the sci-fi novel? The first person to write one and who invented it? It's actually Mary Shelley.
Oh, yeah.
Isn't that crazy? So that's like a big thing for me is like when we're talking about representation, and I did struggle. I've only found two people that I really felt that like I wanted to emulate and that I felt represented me. Trying to find that answer, I found it interesting that that genre, that sci-fi novel that like I grew up reading was invented by a woman, and yet I'm still like searching to find women in these genres that I see myself in. Yeah. So I thought that was like an interesting like quip, like, oh my gosh, can you believe that? And then also kind of seeing how you guys didn't know it. I'm glad, yay.
Yeah, didn't know that.
But yeah, like what you think about that as well.
Oh, I feel like there are a lot of parallels for things like that throughout our society, where it's like you find out that the first person who invented the computer or something was a woman, or that there were these people who did crazy things in NASA. And there's all of these societal foundational things that were put forward by women that we don't even realize were a thing. And so something that they created themselves essentially by creating this genre, and then almost having a difficulty of staying in it is just bonkers. It's just crazy. It's unfortunate that it's like, oh, it's not surprising, but that's terrible that it's not surprising.
Yeah, I think like what bothers me is that it's not surprising that it was hidden. That should bug you. Or at least I think it should have bugged me. I'm not surprised that a woman invented like Wi-Fi. I'm not surprised in the internet. I'm not surprised that like a woman got like man to the moon. I'm not like things like that. I'm not surprised, but I'm surprised that like it's been hidden for so long. And like what, you know what I mean? Like why is it now in 2018 when these things happened in the 60s that like we're now oh, let's give them their recognition. And like, can we even name their names? Is like a big thing as well. Like how accustomed are we to using these names every day when we're talking about something? We're talking about like space exploration. Like, oh yeah, Neil Armstrong, but like, what about the woman that put him there?
And Thomas Edison, and like all these different people who are doing like, you know, things that are involved in our early industrial revolution and stuff. They're in our textbooks. There's, you know, we talk about all of this kind of stuff. There's no reason that those women's names should not be like right there with all of that stuff.
Absolutely.
How do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel like there's like a lot of the female names that I remember from history are centered around sort of social services progressions and not as much around technological, scientific discoveries. Like, you know, you think of the big science names, Newton, Einstein, Darwin, like, you know, you think of all these male names, and I think there was like an access barrier for a lot of women for a lot of time, but I'm sure that there were lots of important discoveries made by women that we don't hear about. And I think, you know, there's that expression, history is told by the conqueror.
That's a great that's a
and I honestly don't know enough to know. Unfortunately, I don't know enough to know how much of it is the people that had the means and the status in society, the men, to perpetuate discovery or carry a story forward, and how much of it was just that women weren't there. Like there are times when I don't know. Like,
the thing that comes to mind is like the discovery of the double helix. Like you're saying that like were women there, and it's like we know they were, like, women didn't just come about in, like, 1919. Like, we've been there.
Yeah.
Right.
But being there like, on the forefront of it. And then,
and that's the other thing is, like, that kind of, like, erasing them from history in that respect, and they were there. And it's always interesting to find these new things that come up. And things like that, where talking about, like, history is told by the winners, right? Like, you get to write how that all went down.
That's something that I've even noticed happening with, like, in my college career where, so I study archaeology, and, like, when I first started studying this almost like 7 years ago, the classes, they were taught by men and women, but even the way that the curriculum was being presented towards the end, you do a lot of repetition when you're in your degree, right? So you're learning the same crap over and over again because they're always going to kind of give you the little intro at the beginning. Yeah. And so maybe, we're starting out with like the introduction to the history of like Western archaeology. And it wasn't until like the last year that I was in it and I was being taught actually by women who were women archaeologists or biological anthropologists who were like, okay, here's all the stuff you already know. And then I'd look up and I'd like see a woman on the screen from the 1900s or something. I'm like, who is this and how have I missed this information the whole time? Yeah. I'm like, oh yeah, this lady, she was the one who created the seriation technique that Flinders Petrie ended up taking over and being the one who was like credited for coming up with this method of relative dating for archaeological material. Yeah. But there was a woman whose material he referenced like ahead of time, foundational. Yeah. Like, and so she kind of did a little bit of these studies that sort of opened the door for him. Yeah. And so that happens a lot too, where I think you have this like pioneering women who come in and maybe they're the first ones to put the pickaxe down or something. Yeah. And then a man comes along like, that's pretty good work. Let me pick that up where, you left off, take a little bit of that, put my own stuff on it. And then, through their social status and their money and things just kind of get out there.
And see, that's the thing is like, I love that because think of like all the great things that have come thanks to like that kind of collaborative or kind of like, okay, great, pulling this foundation, now how do I improve? Yeah. And I love that. Like, I don't think we'd be where we are without that. I think the only thing that gets me is that erasure. Like, where is, give credit where credit is due. And I don't know that I always see that.
Yeah, you definitely don't see it. And I think the reason why I'm hearing about it now is because I'm having women who are finding that information and teaching it to me. Yeah. And so they're now in power. Yeah. So they're the ones who are telling this history. Yeah. And so that's helping a little bit, and hopefully is a good indicator for our future in education.
Yeah, that inspiration too. Because like how many people how many women don't want to go into STEM fields because you just don't see yourself there. And also it's like incredibly hard relative to your gender. So not just that like, oh, the work is hard. Well, all work is kind of hard. You gotta work at it generally. But kind of like that, like leaky pipeline that we're talking about. And so I get inspired and I love seeing these things. Like, okay, great. So like this woman did this, and then it led to all of that. I'm like, I got it. Now I see myself. Because before I'm like, great, that was history and I understand it, but I don't know that I relate to it otherwise. And so that was something that I definitely see. Yeah. I think that's the other thing too, is like talking about getting the same stuff over and over, like in school. That's definitely the case. And it wasn't until I took my first like women and gender studies course that I was like, oh, mind blown. Hold on. I'm going to talk my husband's ear for years because let me tell you. So that's been really fun and interesting as well. And definitely a new perspective too.
Yeah.
And with that, another episode of Friends Talking Nerdy is in the books. We thank you all for listening. This is Tim Jousma. Remember to tune in again next week for part 2 of our discussion on women in pop culture. This is definitely a great episode to record, and we hope you enjoy the show. Remember to go to our website, friendstalkingnerdy.com, where you can hear all of our back episodes if you've not already subscribed to the show on your favorite podcast provider. So once again, tune in again next week.
Dad, I have some questions about women.
Can't you see I'm reading the, cultural calendar? Ooh, mostly Mozart is in town.
Homer, Bart's at a very curious age. As his father, I think you should have a frank and earthy discussion about,
But Marge, I think he should learn about it the same way I did.
Are you sure?
Zookeeper! Zookeeper! Those two monkeys are killing each other!
They're having sex.
Oh? Maybe you're right. Now if you'll excuse us. This is a sacred moment between a boy and his father. Son, a woman is a lot like, a refrigerator. They're about 6 feet tall, 300 pounds. They make ice and... Oh, wait a minute. Actually, a woman is more like a beer. They smell good. They look good. You'd step over your own mother just to get one. But you can't stop at one. You want to drink another woman. So I says, yeah, if you want that money, come and find it, 'cause I don't know where it is, you baloney. You make me wanna retch.
Subscribe to Friends Talking Nerdy on iTunes, the Google Play Music Store, as well as Spotify. Remember to support Friends Talking Nerdy on Patreon. Goodbye, darling.